Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge, a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services focusing on the Port of Anchorage and the major commercial participants in the Cook Inlet region, providing customers with marine services specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller, and today is May 19th. I'll be taking you through the Alaska weather forecast this evening. As always, you can keep up to date with us at arh.noaa.gov, and that'll give you all of Alaska's weather. Our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. That's available 24 hours a day. You can find us on social media, NWS Alaska, for all 3 offices in the state. You can look on Twitter at NWS Alaska using the hashtag AKwx to get statewide updates. And also you can find this show and a few other segments later on this evening on YouTube. So let's get into it tonight, as we have quite a few things to talk about, even though it seems like a relatively quiet pattern. We are in breakup season, and we are starting fire weather season, or continuing fire weather season. So as you can see, for tonight's hazard map, our warnings are primarily all fire weather red flag warnings. And that extends basically from the Copper River Basin up through the Alaska Range and to Fort Yukon. We do have very dry conditions out there. Winds are not as gusty as they were at the end of last week, but we do have very dry conditions with relative humidity values dropping into the teens and even single digits during the afternoon hours with warm temperatures. And so with that, dangerous fire conditions, and we do expect those to continue until late Wednesday night, about 10 p.m. Wednesday night for most of these. Copper River Basin will be 9 p.m. Wednesday. And then we'll be adding in the Upper Kuskokwim Valley until starting tomorrow at 1 p.m. and going until 10 p.m. Tomorrow night, Wednesday night. And again, those are all red flag warnings. Now up along the Arctic coast, we do have a flood advisory. Again, that's for the Dalton Highway between milepost 399 and 405. And we do have a flood watch also in effect, and that's basically for all rivers draining out towards the coastal locations there. The warm temperatures have surged all the way up to north of the Brooks Range, and that is making for quick river rises and a quick breakup for parts of those rivers, and so thus we do have those advisories and those watches. And lastly, underneath the red here, we do have one more warning, and that is a flood warning, and that is in effect until 11:15 p.m. Friday, and that's for the Porcupine River near Yukon. Again, similar conditions there with quick warming and rapid breakup. Snow melt, seeing river rises along the Porcupine. So be advised if you're traveling in those areas. There are some road closures along the Dalton, and there are some high rivers near Porcupine. And again, here's our flood watch map as of noon this afternoon, and you can see most of the breakup is well underway for majority of the state. Mostly open rivers now for the southern half of the state, and up there near along the Porcupine near Fort Yukon is where we have our flood watch and our flood warning just right at Fort Yukon there. And so be advised, breakup season is well underway. Let's take a look at our satellite image now for the afternoon hours, and you can see here our low pressure continues to spin near Dutch Harbor, and this is just a weak area of low pressure. It has been pretty much semi-permanent there for the past several days, even up to a week now, and it continues to move very slowly off to the northeast and then push its way up into the Bering. And we'll see a change in that pattern as we get into the forecast here in a few minutes. Also, keep your eyes on this as I put it into motion one more time. This is a typhoon, which is relatively early in the season for a typhoon to be forming in the West Pacific. But the very interesting thing about this is that we actually expect this typhoon Dolphin, to recurve into the Alaska weather pattern on the storm superhighway, and with that we do expect this to bring some pretty significant winds into the western Aleutians, and you can see our social media post on Facebook and Twitter regarding that activity. Shouldn't be until late Thursday and then into Friday, but a pretty interesting scenario to have happen this time of year so early in the year. It's usually more of a fall event. So taking a look at now the visible satellite for south central and southeast Alaska, you can see our area of low pressure spinning down there south of Dutch Harbor. High pressure remains in control for the Gulf of Alaska, and with that we do have some coastal stratus and a little bit of patchy fog along the coastal sites. A few places around southeast Alaska did report fog this morning. Most of that is lifted to just a stratus deck for this afternoon. We've had some stratus in south central as well near the Cook Inlet region hanging around the mountains, and we do expect that to linger through the overnight hours, especially after we lose some of the heating. Taking a look at this one more time now, you can see clear skies for the most part across much of south central Copper River Basin and up towards the upper Tanana Valley there. Do want to mention a few thunderstorms that have fired over portions of western Canada and northwest Canada. Some of those are starting to drift towards Juneau's area with just a weak flow throughout the upper levels of the atmosphere. And so with that, we do have some isolated thunderstorms in the forecast for southeast Alaska. Taking a look at today's surface map, you can see our area of low pressure just south of Dutch Harbor there, bringing, again, plenty of rain. This is really a contrast between two systems here. We have this high pressure that's been in charge for the last several days before even the weekend got underway at 1,026 millibars. And really what that's doing is just allowing this moisture to stream up from the North Pacific all the way through the west coast of Alaska. And it's just been raining on and off, but for the most part, very steadily throughout southwest Alaska for the last several days, even up to as much as a week. And that pattern does not look to continue, or does not look to end anytime soon. Looks to continue as high pressure will remain in control for the Gulf, and with that, that moisture will have nowhere to go but to stream up into southwest Alaska and eventually towards the Seward Peninsula area. And so therefore, we do have those showers in the forecast and some fog as that warm air spreads northward over those cooler waters. We do have some fog and showers as you get a little bit farther northward. As you see around the backside of the system, we do have a little bit of precipitation wrapping towards the central Aleutians, but nothing especially heavy with that. And then over towards southeast Alaska, that's where we have that weak, what we call a thermal trough, resulting basically from the afternoon heating over the higher terrain there, and that has helped to trigger those thunderstorms this afternoon. Now, as we go into the overnight hours, we do expect those thunderstorms to taper off once we lose our daytime heating, so we should see things transition more to just a showery pattern, especially along the higher terrain. Our high pressure will remain in charge in the Gulf of Alaska, now down to just 1,025 millibars, pretty consistent high pressure system, and that will allow those clouds to just skirt into south central Alaska, and again, the marine influence along the southeastern coastlines there. Looking back towards southwest, again, our plume of moisture is not really going to be going anywhere. We still see significant plume of moisture throughout southwest Alaska, and our weak area of low pressure continues to fall apart south of the Aleutian Islands. On into Wednesday now, similar pattern with moisture just continuing to stream up in the form of rain, some patchy fog along the southwest coast, and we do have some fog expected underneath high pressure along the Arctic coast. And we'll see the low pressure, this one will slowly weaken here on Wednesday and die off as it runs into this ridge, and the energy will really transfer into the Bering Strait, which eventually will allow on Thursday for this ridge of high pressure to move into southwest Alaska and finally bring an end to the precipitation. Here's the remnants of Typhoon Dolphin that we'll see move into the western Aleutians, bringing with it storm force winds. Right now we're looking for max gales, minimum storm force winds into the western Aleutians, and we will see some heavy rain associated with that at times for islands like Shimya and possibly Atka and Adak. Do expect the marine influence once again for Thursday, especially in the morning hours, and showers should be diminishing, not as much in the way of convective activity on Thursday for southeast Alaska. Looking at our temperatures now, we had mainly 50s and some low 60s for much of southeast Alaska, 52 degrees at Yakutat. Valdez came in at 52 and Middleton Island was a cooler 46. We did see low 50s to mid 50s throughout much of south central Alaska. And as we get over towards towards the interior portion of the state, we saw Fairbanks come in again in the mid 70s at 73 degrees. Eagle, Alaska was 78, the warm spot once again. And interestingly enough, Barrow came in at 46 degrees, which is their new record high temperature for this day. Their old record was 38 degrees, set back in 2009. Mid 40s was kind of the trend as you worked your way down towards the Norton Sound area. slowly becoming the 30s as you got out on the Seward Peninsula there, and Nome came in at 51 degrees. Taking a look at southwest Alaska now, 47 degrees at Iliamna, 58 at King Salmon, 52 at Dillingham, and 57 at Bethel. And then we saw mainly 40s, upper 40s to mid to low 40s along the Alaska Peninsula, with 50 degrees being the warm spot there in the chain at Dutch Harbor. Taking a look at tonight's forecast, very similar conditions to the past several nights. Upper 40s, maybe even some low 50s for southeast Alaska. In the Copper River Basin, where we have those dry conditions, we'll see temperatures be able to drop quickly tonight into the mid-30s. And we do expect around 40 degrees just north of the Alaska range. Towards the Brooks Range, we have the low to mid-30s. And for much of western Alaska, we'll see temperatures in the low to mid-40s. Out for the Aleutian Chain, expect low 40s for the dominant low temperature tonight. And then for tomorrow's highs, again, very warm, sunny conditions out over eastern Alaska, keeping those fire conditions out there, mid to upper 70s, even low 80s in some spots along the Alcan border. 60s for southeast Alaska. We'll see around upper 40s for much of the areas north of the Brooks Range, and even some 50s along the Arctic coast there, the northwest portion of the state. Looking with the with that moist flow, keeping clouds in southwest, temperatures will generally be in the mid to upper 40s, even some low 50s near King Salmon, and then mid to upper 40s for the Aleutian Chain. Now taking a look at our aviation forecast, we do expect pretty widespread area of MVFR conditions across the western half of the state with that onshore moist flow, and some IFR conditions to sneak in along those coastal sites with low stratus, keeping those ceilings quite low to the deck. With that though, we'll do a look at the past conditions. Anaktuvik will be VFR. Adigan also VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill, expect them to be MVFR in the morning. They saw some stratus there this morning and improving quickly to VFR with that sunshine burning off that stratus. Same story for Rainy. Windy will also be VFR. We're looking for Isabel to be VFR. Mentasta will be visual flight rules. Tanita, visual flight rules. Portage, same story. Chilkoot and White, also VFR. And with that, we'll jump into our freezing levels. And again, they just continue to surge upwards. Our surface line is now well up to the north in the Bering Strait, with all the way up to a 10,000-foot surface freezing level in the North Pacific and southern Gulf of Alaska. For tomorrow's icing, most of it will be confined to higher elevations where that strong southerly flow is. Above about 8,000 feet, some light to isolated moderate. And then again, wrapping around that area of low pressure down to about 5,000 feet. Our next area will start to move in here in the later portions of the day with light to isolated moderate above 3,000 feet. Taking a look at our jet stream now, fairly active jet stream pattern, but not a whole lot of change because of the way it's structured, kind of making a blocking type pattern. And with that, we have 140 knots, quickly diving down toward the North Pacific at 75 knots, climbing back up over the ridge over the state, and then off into the inner portions of Canada at 90 knots. Seeing about 100 knots supporting the jet here in the southern portion of the Gulf of Alaska, becoming 80 knots into the continental United States. For 9,000-foot winds, the key area to focus on again is where the strong southerly flow continues for much of southwest Alaska. 40 knots there at 9,000 feet is the strongest we'll see, and then wrapping around the ridge of high pressure back here, about 20 to 25 knots. For 3,000-foot winds, similar story, just slightly slower speeds in through this area here. And that's where we do expect our interaction with terrain to create our turbulence. 35 to 30 knots there, 40 knots just along the coast of the mainland. And there's our turbulence map, looking for just occasional widespread moderate below 6,000 feet and where those winds will interact with terrain. Now stay with us. We'll be right back with the rest of the marine forecast.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Jim Peranto. Flooding can occur in Alaska any time of the year. Whether it's because of heavy rainfall or high volumes of snowmelt, flooding can pose a threat to life and property for Alaskans. But there's another cause of flooding during the springtime that's of great concern to people who live along Alaskan rivers. The cause of the flooding is breakup ice jams. Today I'll be talking with John Madden, who is the Director of the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for Alaska, and he'll be telling us about their program called River Watch and how that program can help prepare communities during the river breakup season. Welcome back, John.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you back in. We want to talk about the Riverwatch program. I understand it's been around for quite some time, over 30 years, so tell us a little bit about the program.
The Riverwatch is what Alaskans do best. It's Alaskans helping Alaskans. It's a partnership formal between the National Weather Service and the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. There's a third party of the communities who do live along the rivers. We want to understand what's going on, see it happening, so that we can immediately convert the science and the observation into courses of action by the community. It's the best kind of partnership because you go straight from seeing something to doing something.
Well, that leads into my next question. Why is the partnership between the National Weather Service and your division so important to the Riverwatch program?
The National Weather Service has been one of the best supporters that we have amongst the federal family of agencies. It works with us because it can take observations, run it through very elaborate modeling, and make predictions of what's likely to happen. You match up that science along with my divisions, the state division, of how do we convert those predictions into actions. So we have science leading to emergency management and courses of action, leading to the community who must take the immediate actions.
Now, has technology made it easier to predict which rivers will flood?
Well, Alaska has 3,000 rivers, so technology won't help us look at all of them. But the technology like the satellite imagery, the computer modeling, the observations, the communications has increased the accuracy, but those are predictions. What we try to do with Riverwatch is to fly the rivers with humans, a Weather Service hydrologist or a meteorologist and a Homeland Security and Emergency Management operations specialist. What's happening right now? The technology has helped us focus in on which are the rivers that are likely to present problems to the communities.
So you have both observations on the ground and then you have the flyovers, and both of those combined are giving you more information on what the rivers are doing.
Yes, and in that flyover, we also have that third member of our partnership, the community. The community understands the river far better than anyone who doesn't live there. The nuances, the curves, the turns, the tides, in lower rivers, but also if a condition is leading to something, the local community can partner with the other people in the plain, decide that a course of action is necessary, and then communicate in that community's language directly by radio, saying this is what we see, execute the plan that we've made.
So you mentioned one thing that the community is involved with the Riverwatch program. What other ways can the communities help out in the Riverwatch program?
As with many emergencies or hazards that face Alaska, the role of the community is to prepare for that eventuality, be it earthquake or tsunami or river ice jams. Prepare. Know where your shelter is. Know where the power generation is. Where is the high ground? What's your pathway to high ground? Make sure that all of the members of the community are informed and educated and tested so that when that happens, these floods happen very fast, but when it happens, the community knows what they will do and they can pick the right course of action for that circumstance.
I was online today and I found a guide that I believe it's titled the 2008 Spring Flood Breakup Guide. And it has a whole bunch of information on how communities can prepare themselves. There was contact information. There was some stuff on how the Weather Service is involved with all this. I would imagine you would recommend people going to that guide and really looking at that if they really want to develop a plan for their community.
That guide is very important for the community and the families and individuals. It has guidance for all of them. But it all comes into things happen fast, and the time to think about what you're going to do is before the ice breaks up, before the floods come in. And so that preparedness is in that spring guide. It's the counterpart to what we publish in the fall for the coastal communities of the Fall Sea Storm Guide. We issue this out weeks and sometimes months before the season to give the communities that opportunity to go through their drill. Not every river floods every year. Therefore, not every community gets that practice every year. So it can be a few years in between these flood episodes. We don't want people to think that what it was last year means it's what it will be this year. That planning and preparedness and practice is very important for the community to be ready for whatever can come up.
And how is that going with the communities in Alaska? You getting a lot of feedback? Are people, really taking this seriously? Numbers, I don't know how many communities are actually, have a plan and a disaster plan if this
The
occurs.
river communities have been strong supporters of this. Every time we prepare for this, we include the communities in on the estimates of how this is going to come about, their observations of what's happening, their observations on how it is similar or dissimilar to previous years. All of that feeds back into the state and to the Weather Service to help us refine this. Every community listens very closely because these communities living right at the edge of the river, their airstrips are usually on the flat land next to the river. Some of their houses are right on the banks. They're very attuned to it, but they cannot make all those observations hundreds of miles upstream. We cooperate with the Canadians as the headwaters of the Yukon break up. That helps us look at the Fort Yukon, Beaver, that area. Mm-hmm. The Kuskokwim starts breaking up, and looking at what it's doing 100 miles away helps us prepare for 100 miles downstream. They can't do that by themselves, so through this partnership, we all benefit.
Great. There's more information I think people can go to on the internet. There's a couple websites. I believe that's linked from your main Homeland Security website. Correct me if I'm wrong here, John. There's one that's www.ready.alaska.gov.
That's our portal into the full range of hazards facing the state, one of which at this time of year is the river breakup.
Okay, and then the other one is www.flood.alaska.gov. Is that also part of?
It's a newly emerging one which will be a specialty for all of the hazards for floods, both the coastal and the river. So we'll have current information, we'll links to the Weather Service, other means by which you can report observations. It's a new approach for this year, but we think it's going to be very beneficial for the communities.
Outstanding. And there's another website too, the National Weather Service's River Forecast Center's web page, which is aprfc.arh.noaa.gov. That's another website you might want to bookmark. Thanks, John, for coming in today and talking to us about the River Watch program.
It's always a pleasure, Jim.
And thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
And welcome back from the segment. Let's dive into your marine forecast for Wednesday over southeast Alaska. As you can see, mainly light winds for the inner passageways, south winds 20 knots, 4-foot seas for the northern portions near Skagway and Lynn Canal, and then becoming north and northwest, 15 to 20 knots, 3 to 4-foot seas. Out over the open waters, west to northwest winds 15 to 20 knots and seas between 5 and 6 feet. On Thursday, again, pretty calm conditions for the inner passageways, switching out of the north now for Lynn Canal, 10 knots, 2 feet. And in Clarence Strait, south winds expected 10 knots and 2 feet. And down towards Dixon Entrance, looking for northwest winds 20 knots and 4 feet. And then for the open waters, 20 to 25 knots out of the west-northwest and 5 to 7-foot seas. For South Central, expecting the strongest winds to be confined where the area of high pressure meets the area of low pressure with a tight gradient. So southeast easterly flow 25 to 30 knots near Kodiak Island, and seas heaviest at about 11 feet for Shelikof and southern Cook Inlet, western Barrens. Up towards the Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound, it's just variable winds 10 knots and seas 2 feet. And near Middleton Island, southwest winds 10 knots and seas 4 feet. For Thursday, similar conditions for Cook Inlet and for Prince William Sound, and expecting those seas and those winds to taper off just a little bit. Still southeast to easterly, 15 to 20 knots, but seas down now as low as 3 feet in some spots, 6 to 9 feet just to the southeast of Kodiak Island. Out over the Alaska Peninsula, we do expect some gusty southeasterly winds, 25, gusting as high as 40 knots, coming through the bays and passes there near Port Hyden and Pilot Point. But otherwise, 15 knots to 30 knots out of the generally south to southeast. Seas 10 to 11 south of the chain and about 6 feet north side of the islands. And 2 to 4 feet now on Thursday with winds slackening down to 10 knots. South of the chain, expect 10 to 15 knots out of the southeast and seas about 8 feet. Now over the Aleutian chain, we do expect northwesterly winds around that area of low pressure, increasing to 25 knots as you get towards Atka and Nikolsky, and expect seas on the order of about 4 to 11 feet. And as we get towards the western Aleutians, we'll see northwest winds out there, 25 to 30 feet, seas on the order of about 11 to 12 feet. And on Thursday, that's where we're really going to start seeing things pick up ahead of that area of that old former typhoon. Seas building as high as 18 feet and winds east and southeast at about 45 knots. Towards the central and eastern Aleutians, expect anywhere between 15 and 35 knots, generally out of the north or northwest, except for the central Aleutians out of the south, and seas between about 7 and 8 feet. For the west coast, expect southeasterly flow becoming more northwest and westerly towards the Pribilof Islands, 10 to 20 knots near the Pribilofs, with 20 to 30 knots a little bit further to the north, and seas on the order of 3 to 6 feet. And southwest winds will dominate on Thursday, winds generally 15 to 20 knots and seas about 5 feet. For the Arctic coast, expect northeast to easterly flow, 15 to 30 knots, increasing as you get towards the Seward Peninsula there. And on Thursday, expect southerly winds along the northwest portion of the state, with easterly winds along the Arctic coast. 25 knots will be the dominant flow. So recapping tonight's weather, we do have some thunderstorms that are starting to die off over the southeastern portion of the state. Just an isolated chance to see some near Juneau and the southeastern portions of Alaska. Wet weather will continue for southwest Alaska, while high pressure remains in charge of the Gulf of Alaska and much of eastern Alaska. That trend will continue on into Wednesday now, as this area of high pressure is slow to move anywhere, and the stream of moisture will continue into the southwest. And then by Thursday, we finally see our next area of low pressure starting to move into the western Aleutians, bringing storm force winds, and finally we'll start to see a break develop as high pressure moves into southwest Alaska, allowing things to dry out. Thanks for watching the show this evening. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge, a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services focusing on the Port of Anchorage and the major commercial participants in the Cook Inlet region, providing customers with marine services specifically tailored to their needs.